Hello, welcome back to Marathon Man, where I'm going through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me at a story that was once generally considered to be the worst Doctor Who story of all time. Welcome back, and if you're enjoying the marathon so far, why not give it a like? Please do share it around, and while you're here, subscribe if you haven't already, and clang that cloister bell. It helps more people find the channel and stand a better chance of running the marathon alongside us. It's always when I reach this story on a marathon that I realise how little time I have left with Hartnell. After the Gunfighters, there are 4 stories left, 16 episodes, only 16. Then it hits me like a freight train just how close I am to the biggest shift imaginable in the show's history. And I then decide to savour what little time I have left with William Hartnell's Doctor. And is that decision why I have such goodwill towards a story that once languished at the very bottom of fan consensus? Well, the first time I watched The Gunfighters, it was in isolation and I loved it. And I have always been very partial to it since. So no, I don't think it's that decision that means I have such goodwill towards the Gunfighters. I just like the Gunfighters. But then season 3 goes and surprises me once again. This isn't a complete reevaluation, but I do think it's the first notable example of something in this marathon. I have seen previous stories that I've very much not liked improve slightly, and I have also seen some stories that I've really liked, you know, come down a little bit, get dethroned from top positions, basically. What hasn't really changed, though, are the perennial favourites, even if their respective positions have shifted slightly among them. So, like, for example, Marco Polo, the Aztecs, the Reign of Terror, the Romans, the Crusade, the Time Meddler, the Mythmakers, and the Massacre are all still, I think, the cream of the crop. It's just that there used to be another one among there as well. The Gunfighters used to be a top 10 story for me, out of all of Doctor Who, if you can believe it. Now, this is by no means a confession about being mistaken about the Gunfighters being good, because I do still think it's good. But this is the first time on a marathon where a once all-time favourite has fallen quite so drastically. To outside eyes, that fall is probably only slight, but to me it feels seismic. It's now not even in my top 10 William Hartnells. So why the change? Having attempted this marathon with as close to a clear head as I'm able to muster, my eyes have been open to certain things. Now normally that is I'm able to now see past certain things that have previously prevented me liking aspects of certain stories. Except here with the Gunfighters, I see something very clearly now. I mean, it's always been there, I've just kind of glossed over it before, maybe because of previous goodwill to the story. It's just that now, it's staring me in the face and I cannot ignore it. When I think of previous criticisms I've made against The Chase and the Celestial Toymaker, it would be grossly unfair for me to hand-wave them away here just because I have a previous affinity with the Gunfighter. So I'm not going to, because trust me, it is a serious mark against. With the exception of Doc Holliday, Seth Harper and Charlie, the guest cast are pretty bad. Lawrence Payne looks and moves the part, but it all goes out the window when he opens his mouth. And I can't look past how bad nearly everybody's accents are in this story. I mean, as if that's the only problem with them, but sometimes it's just the largest problem. But in the case of William Hurndall as Ike Clanton, there is absolutely nothing right. He's quite possibly the worst guest actor Doctor Who has had up until this point. He can't even die well. It definitely brings the story down. Thing is, that really is the only thing I can find fault with the Gunfighters for. Now, it is a colossal dent in the score, don't get me wrong, purely just on percentages. This many guest cast and about only 3 good ones, and even then, two of those 3 decent ones failed to make it into the final episode. But other than that, the Gunfighters is every bit of fun as I remember it being. Not even the song bothers me, and I understand that that is the biggest bugbear that some of the people who dislike this story have. It's just that for me, it kind of feeds into that feeling of experimentation that's felt rife in season 3. No other Doctor Who story is narrated by song. There's a reason for that. Yeah, and you'd be right. To do that week in, week out would be absolutely dreadful. But as a one-off, it kind of imbues this story with more of a sense of identity than most. And for me anyway, has always been part of its charm. The direction is dynamic and the writing is a lot of fun. This is evident from the off, I think, when Stephen and Dodo begin delighting at having landed in the Wild West. And it's a lovely moment between the two of them as they twirl around. And as much of a void the character of Dodo has been, it's really nice to see her so accepted by Stephen and the Doctor. Luckily for her, she actually finally gets some decent things to work with for once in this story, even if it is cruelly snatched away from her directly afterwards. When she holds Doc Holliday at gunpoint, it really is quite a strong scene. This is exactly how she should have been handled from the off. She's resourceful, she's cunning, and she is desperate to not actually have to be doing it, even going so far as to say as much to the man she's holding up. There's a lot going on in that scene, and it really fleshes out Dodo very well. And then she faints for a punchline. Poor thing can't catch a decent script. And I was amazed to discover a detail that I'd seemingly forgotten about, which is that the script itself even seems to acknowledge her nature as a semi-self-aware character. The Doctor says to her,
"My dear Dodo, you know, you're fast becoming a prey to every cliche-ridden convention in the American West."
In my opinion, it doesn't even need the American West qualifier. That is insane. And if it is intended as a knowing wink, then for me, it's a too little too late acknowledgement of it, as if the show is trying to cover up for the fact that it hasn't particularly written Dodo very well up to this point. Like, you know, when somebody gets caught out doing something stupid and they end up saying like, "Oh no, it's just a joke, I meant to do that." And rather than coming out smelling of roses, it sort of just makes it all the more embarrassing. Anyway, maybe that's just my overprotective feelings for Dodo coming to the fore, to the point where I just wish that the production would just leave her alone, because she's done nothing to deserve this. The Doctor fares much, much better. Hartnell, as is usual when he's given such good scripts, sees the quality and raises it. I am very fond of how this seems to be the first story that I can recall where his outfit is not incongruous. He certainly fits in better than Stephen and Dodo in their ludicrous cowboy outfits, and I find it fascinating to see him fit right in aesthetically. That itself strangely seems to be incongruous. Despite the subject matter, the whole thing has a pervading jaunty and upbeat tone, which is sorely needed after the previous story. That one left a bad taste in my mouth, and this is the spoonful of sugar afterwards. Too sweet for some, but for me it's the ideal palate cleanser. And even though I'm not giving it an unfair advantage just because of past affinity to it, that while the guest cast borders on unforgivable at points, there is a sense of fun here that does help me overlook certain things. The accents of a lot of the guest cast are definitely a hindrance at enjoying the story, but the unlikelihood of Stephen and Dodo both being able to play piano, nah, I'm good with that. It's a silly story after all. And there are some cracking lines to be found here.
You kill a guy out of sheer professional ethics, and then you've got 3 of his brothers chasing after you to leave with it one. That makes me real angry.
That one really sits well with me, but I think my favourite is when Stephen says,
"Let's hope the piano knows it."
Special mention too to the Doctor's,
"I had to find some sort of suitable cover after all. You can't walk into the middle of a western town and say you've come from outer space. But gracious me, you'll be arrested on a vagrancy charge."
And in fact, the Doctor's integration into this story is one of my favourites so far, maybe even my favourite. How he casually introduces himself and his companions with aliases is delightful. And him getting mistaken for Doc Holliday, a ruse that the real Doc Holliday allows to play out, makes for a nice transition into a plot that the Travellers have found themselves landing in the middle of. I also quite enjoy the Doctor pulling a Chatterton and referring to Wyatt Earp as Mr. Werp throughout. Even though much of it is played for laughs, perhaps because of the subject matter, landing in this setting actually brings out the Doctor's moral code quite strongly.
"Nothing will ever induce me to raise a gun in anger."
It is a very, very good story for the Doctor, and throwing him into a setting with outlaws and cowboys and gunfighters in the frontier only magnifies the qualities that we love him for. It does lead to an odd moment though.
"You can't rewrite history, not one line."
Please don't do the gunfight at the OK Corral though. It jars a lot with what we've seen previously, even as recently as the massacre, but I can reconcile it to myself in my little fan canon version in my head. By trying to stop it, the Doctor actually is putting wills in motion for it to happen. And so I can kind of convince myself that he's doing that deliberately, so he's not meddling with time, but he is seen to be proactive in trying to stop it, which is something he might be mindful about, especially after being admonished by Stephen a few weeks ago in Paris, that maybe he's trying to appear to be trying to stop it, but knows that he actually can't, and by trying to stop it won't make a difference. There you go. That's what Doctor Who does to us. It tries to make us embellish its own stories. But isn't that half of the fun? Given that this story takes place in the 1880s, that places it roughly 85-ish years before it was made. Now, the same distance would be like a story today being set in the late 1930s. Though, while it doesn't feel as recent as that, partly because of how quickly the 20th century moved, it is worth bearing in mind, I think, that at the time this was broadcast, it wasn't as ancient history as it may feel. So yeah, the Gunfighters has indeed fallen slightly out of favour, but it's by no means a slog to get through, and by no means as heinous as some still suggest it is. Is it the worst story of them all? Of course not. In fact, I still really enjoy it, and so I can't join in with the bashing of it. It's just too good for that, despite featuring some of the worst acting in the show so far. It being played for laughs actually does it some favours when you consider some of the accents and some of the performances. Imagine if this was all been taken deathly seriously. It doesn't bear thinking about. And it's odd how I can see past men in insect suits more readily than I can the woeful attempts at cowboy speak here. So, 118 episodes into the journey now, and there are a couple of major shake-ups ahead. Things are about to get bumpy. Aside from the little thrill I get at Scott, Tracy and Brains being in the same Doctor Who story, I think I'm going to have to go for the scene with the Doctor and Doc Holliday in the dentist's surgery. A wonderful scene. Ike. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this Swift Half in the Last Chance Saloon, then please do give it a like and spread the word. And what do you think of the Gunfighters? Was the previous fan consensus wrong, and do you think it's a gem of the Hartnell years, or is it really the worst of the worst? Am I being too harsh on the guest cast, or are their accents just too darn tootin' impossible to get around? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for an oft-overlooked classic. If you don't want to miss that, then hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and let's go meet the savages.